What makes up the mind of a godly wife? When we think about a godly wife, we often think about her actions, like how she raises her family, how she treats her husband, and manages her home. But before any of these actions can be done well, they first need to begin as thoughts. Hi everyone, welcome back to Mind and Bible. Let God transform you by changing the way you think. Romans 12:2. Okay, so when I first started thinking about this topic, I realized how much of our lives are shaped by our thoughts that we allow to stay in our minds. It takes discipline to think in a godly way, especially in marriage. Because the reality is, one thought can completely change the direction of your day. For example, I could be getting up in the morning, and if I look in the mirror, and if I'm even just bloated, I think, wow, I look so fat. Nothing around me has necessarily changed, like my circumstances aren't changed, but now that one thought is affecting my mood, my confidence, my attitude, and how I treat different people. That is how powerful our thoughts are. Even if it's something that your husband says that you might have thought is insensitive. And the thing is, if one thought can change our entire day, imagine what years and years and months, days, weeks of ungodly thoughts can do to our brain. So the mind of a godly wife is not something that happens on accident. It is something that we are intentional about every single day. And this is done by continually surrendering our thoughts to Christ, which brings us to our first point. The mind of a godly wife takes her thoughts captive. We read in 2 Corinthians 10:5, we are destroying speculations of every lofty thing raised up against the knowledge of God. And we are taking every thought captive to the obedience of Christ. And in Proverbs 23:7, it says, as a man thinks, so he is. Okay, so psychology has shown that our thoughts are automatic. So your brain is constantly scanning for danger, patterns, and memories. So what that means is a thought can enter your mind before you consciously choose it. But the existence of a thought is not the same as agreement with it. So for example, you could have put off housework for a while and your husband might come in and say, wow, the house is messy. Immediately your brain is going to start assigning meaning to that, thinking, oh wow, I'm lazy, or he doesn't appreciate anything I do, I'm failing as a wife. But even though he may not have said any of those specific things to you, he just simply said, hey, the house is messy, our brain, based off of patterns or memories, and essentially filling in the gaps, assigning meaning to what was said, whether it's true or not. One of the major ideas about neuroscience is that our brains are constantly making predictions about reality based on past experiences. So maybe you've experienced rejection growing up or criticism growing up, or maybe you've not even experienced anything in your childhood that would make you think that way. Instead, you have experienced it in your current marriage. Because of those experiences, our brains are going to become quicker to interpret situations through those lenses. So before a thought settles into your heart and it starts becoming the way you see yourself, your marriage, or your husband, God gives us an opportunity to examine it. So for instance, scripture tells us to take our thoughts captive, meaning a godly wife learns to stop and ask, what actually happened? What is the story I am telling myself about what is happening? Just because your brain produced the thought does not mean you have to accept that thought as being true and as being who you are now. Because if a thought is left unchecked, it becomes belief, and belief can become an attitude, and an attitude becomes an action. Number 2, the mind of a godly wife chooses wisdom over emotions. It says in Proverbs 31:26, she opens her mouth with wisdom, and the teaching of kindness is on her tongue. This means, what choices do I make that are wise for me and my family, for my household, versus what choices do I make based off of how I'm feeling in the moment. So yes, emotions are real, but they are often temporary and can be heavily influenced on circumstances and your certain situation. So a personal example of that would be, there are times that I just truly feel like going out to eat. And I want to go out to eat even though the budget that me and my husband created cannot cover that. Whether that's like once a week or a couple times a week or whatever, just because I am not feeling like cooking. It could be that I want something specific or something that makes me comfortable. So the emotional part of that says it's only one time and you deserve it. Although one time does add up quite a bit. Wisdom will often ask, is this decision going to hurt us or help us later? What choice serves my family better rather than simply relying off of how I feel? Wisdom often requires us to choose what we will appreciate tomorrow rather than what is going to satisfy us today. In the mind of a godly wife, she will often stop and ask, what is the wisest response? Because emotions are powerful indicators, but they are poor leaders. So a godly wife will take her thoughts captive, and because she does so, she's able to choose wisdom over emotion. So that takes us to point number 3. The mind of a godly wife understands her influence and guards her influence. Though a wife has a ton of influence, and I do believe that just women have tons of influence. So a godly wife understands that she holds a ton of influence over her household and over the people in her house. Whether she realizes it or not, she is constantly shaping the culture of her home. So for example, she has influence over the atmosphere of the home, who is welcome into the house, how those people influence her home, how she raises her children, often how she decorates her home and what the values are in that house. This is why it says in Proverbs 14:1, the wisest of women builds her house, folly with her own hands tear it down. So notice how it says in that passage that the woman is either doing one of two things. She's either building up or tearing down, but she is never just doing nothing. Influence is always being used in one direction or another. And Peter even says in 1 Peter 3:5 that the holy women who hoped in God adorned themselves with a gentle and quiet spirit, not because they were weak, but because they understand the power of a godly influence. A godly wife does not use guilt, manipulation, or constant criticism to get what she wants. She understands that influence is a gift from God and that she should use it carefully. And because of this influence, the mind of a godly wife encourages instead of criticizes. She chooses to build up rather than tear down. I believe this encouragement should be for our husbands, but I also believe it should also be for us. For example, if we are having a really tough day, we miss an appointment, we lose our patience with our children or with our husbands or whatever it might be, it's so important to learn how to go and encourage yourself in the Lord. For example, it says in 1 Samuel 30, verse 6, David strengthened himself in the Lord his God. We see time and time again that David's men wanted to stone him. His circumstances were terrible, and yet he didn't wait for someone else to encourage him. He went to God and found strength there. I think many wives are waiting for someone to speak life into them, which would be great, but that doesn't always happen all the time. We need to learn how to speak life into us and our circumstances. A big part of spiritual maturity is learning how to preach that truth to ourselves. A huge part of renewing our mind is allowing God to transform us from our old patterns and our old way of thinking into a completely new way. God says in the Bible, behold, I am creating something new. When we allow God to strengthen us, when we go to God for that strength, we are then able to carry that out into our day-to-day lives. We're able to strengthen our husbands with encouragement. We're able to pray for him. We're also able to offer grace to him and to the people around us and our children. Because what fills your heart eventually flows out into your home. Number 4, the mind of a godly wife guards her mind from idleness. It says in Proverbs 31:27, she looks well to the ways of her household and does not eat the bread of idleness. This verse is not telling us that a godly wife never rests. It's actually extremely biblical to rest, to take a break. Even God rested. But idleness is different from rest. It's often because of a lack of purpose or direction or even intentionality. So as a manager of your home, the wife will often spend significant amount of times at home. And so because of this, it can often lead to a lot of empty spaces filling the schedule, and that leaves a lot of room for unhealthy habits to start growing. Sometimes idleness can lead to unnecessary spending because shopping starts to become entertainment. Endless scrolling on social media, that can often fill us with anxiety, and then that anxiety starts to create problems that are not real or were not there to begin with. Idleness can also lead to gossip, discontentment, and sometimes even unfaithfulness. This is because our minds were designed to be engaged with purposeful work and intentionality. So a godly wife understands this, and she spends her time filling it with good fruit, such as serving or learning a new skill, studying the Bible, discipling, or spending time with her children. She's using her gifts and talents to serve her husband and her children in a godly way. Rest refreshes the soul, but idleness often leaves the mind vulnerable. As we finish, I want to leave you with something. A godly wife is not someone who never struggles with an ungodly thought. She is not a wife who never feels frustrated or discouraged or emotional or insecure or overwhelmed. However, a godly wife is someone who can constantly bring those thoughts, those feelings, and those issues to Christ, because the goal is transformation of your mind. And that renewal process is only something that God can do, not something that you can do, nor should you attempt to do it in your own strength. Thank you so much for watching. If this video encouraged you, please let me know which thought encouraged you, or which thought you're having the most trouble with, or you struggle with the most. Since I only did cover 4 thoughts in this video, I will be making a part 2 on 4 more thoughts to kind of wrap up this series. Until next time, keep letting God transform you by changing the way you think. I'll see you guys in the next one.